training intended for people who work in conservation and want to better understand how farm finance works. We had our first session on Tuesday with Farm Finance 101 and these landowner tenant considerations. And today we're going to cover these second two modules, the economics of conservation kind of on a larger scale, and some real specifics about how to work with farmers one-on-one, showing them that you understand their finances as well as their conservation goals. Because we're a big group, we'll ask you to stay muted and post questions in the chat. Our presenters would be happy to answer them live or answer them in the chat. I think we'll have time for that today. Anything technical also, please put that in the chat. Again, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to hand it over to Vincent, our first presenter.
Thanks, Anna, and good morning to everyone. While I get my slides put up, and Jenny or Anna, oh, thanks. I'll just introduce myself quickly. So my name is Vincent Gauthier. I work for an organization called Environmental Defense Fund, which I will say a little bit more about in a second here. And what I do in my work is I work with farmers, ranchers, and other ag stakeholders to better understand the financial impacts of conservation practices on the farm and the ranch, how those financial impacts can be resolved through program incentives, through loan products, through insurance products, and really with the aim of helping farmers and ranchers invest in conservation practices profitably. That's the aim of my work. I grew up working on farms in Pennsylvania, dairy farms in Pennsylvania and in Vermont, also some small vegetable operations in Vermont while I lived there. Have a real passion for the work that producers do and really enjoy working with all of them in helping them improve the environmental impact of their operations and supporting them in continuing to do the work that they do in an environmentally sustainable way. So a little bit more about my organization. The Environmental Defense Fund is a global nonprofit environmental organization. Our motto is a vital earth for everyone, focusing on really supporting people and nature together in thriving. My work specifically, as I said, our team at EDF has been working in agriculture for over 20 years. We have teams and experts that focus on the science of conservation practices. We have economists like myself that work on developing financial solutions for those practices. And we also work really collaboratively with producer groups on federal policy. As I said, my work specifically aims to help producers invest in conservation profitably, and I do that, and my team does that in a few ways, including what I'll talk about today, which is measuring the financial costs and benefits of conservation practices and informing producers and their key partners like yourselves in making good decisions for the farm and the environment while keeping the bottom line and financial impacts in mind. I also take a lot of the data and information that I'm going to share with you today to work with agricultural lending institutions like farm credit associations and commercial banks to develop lending solutions that proactively support farmers and ranchers in investing in conservation. So the reason I'm here today presenting about this topic is that engaging producers on the financial impacts of conservation is really essential in informing their management decisions, especially when it comes to the conservation decisions that they make on their operation. And all of their key partners, I think, should have a good understanding of some of the financial impacts so that they can keep that in mind in the conversations that they have with producers when considering conservation decisions. So during today's session, I'm going to cover what I think is the best financial data in the North Central region on the financial impacts of 3 practices: conservation tillage, cover crops, and nutrient management. These are the practices that are have the best financial data in the area that I feel confident in talking about. There are other experts out there that can cover some of the other practices and their financial impacts. And before we dive into the specific financial data on these practices, I wanted to step back and talk a little bit more about what to consider when you're looking at resources that have done research on the financial impacts of conservation, and what types of financial impacts you should be considering and bringing into your conversations with producers. So first, there's 2 ways that the financial impacts of conservation are typically measured and research is typically done. And there's slight nuances that I just wanted to share with you all as you, look at different resources and present those to producers. So the first way of measuring the financial impacts of any practice, but in this case, conservation practices, is a partial budget. What that means is the additional change in management, in this case, adding a conservation practice, is evaluated purely on the additional costs, changes in revenue, or changes in yield that are impacted by that specific practice. So it narrows down the changes to a small list of budget items that are directly impacted by that conservation practice. The second approach is called an enterprise budget analysis, where all aspects of the crop enterprise are evaluated and data is gathered. And typically in this case, the enterprise, including the conservation practice, is compared to some other enterprise that does not include the conservation practice, whether that be that same field in a previous year where the conservation practices was not being used, or to another similar field either on that farm or another farm in the region that was not using that conservation practice. So in this case, you're not narrowing down only to the line items that you know are directly impacted by that conservation practice, but you're looking across the board. How is the enterprise performing financially as compared to a similar enterprise that is not using that conservation practice? So if you dive into, for example, the resource hub that we developed as part of this project, which I think is in the document that Jenny sent to everyone this morning, you'll see that there are some analyses for the North Central region that use a partial budget approach and others that use an enterprise budget approach. As we go through the financial data today, I emphasize to keep in mind different ways in which conservation practices can impact the financial performance of an enterprise and a farm. And we'll go through these quickly. First is that conservation practices can have impacts on revenue. They can impact the yield of the following or the commodity crop. They can also provide new revenue through cost share program incentives. And in some cases, like a cover crop that is either used for forage or for silage, can actually generate revenue themselves. Conservation practices can also impact costs. They can create or provide new input costs, new or changing equipment costs, but they can also impact the crop enterprise through reductions in certain costs, which we'll talk about a little bit today. And then lastly, it's important to consider that a lot of conservation practices don't immediately have an impact on soil health improvements or improvements to erosion control, and that it's important to consider the value of conservation practices financially over time. Producers, no matter what new practice that they are implementing, it takes time for them to figure out the best way of implementing that practice in the most cost effective way. And therefore, oftentimes there's efficiencies over time in implementing a conservation practice. And then if we think about the improvements of soil health that these practices provide, over time, that improvement in soil health can lead to input reductions from the producer. So again, you won't see that in year one of the producer implementing the practice, you'll see it over time. So just some considerations. All right, after all of that, we'll dive into the first conservation practice and some of the financial data that I want to share with you, and that's talking about reduced tillage. So for reduced tillage, the data I'll be presenting to you is from a program called Precision Conservation Management out of Illinois. They're also in some other states, but primarily in Illinois. It's a program supported by Illinois corn growers and Illinois soybean growers, where precision conservation management staff work directly with producers to gather data from their tractor and equipment sensors and software, and combine that input and past data with average costs from economists at the University of Illinois to evaluate the financial costs and benefits of practices like reduced tillage. So the data that I'll be sharing is from 2015 through 2022 combined. And I'm not sure the number of producers, but it's a pretty large sample size. So if we start with evaluating the net returns of different tillage intensities and systems on Illinois corn, we see that the net return is highest for those moderate tillage passes and intensities. So you can see here the right center of this chart that 1 pass light, 2 pass light, and 2 pass moderate tillage systems are the most profitable at 370 plus dollars per acre, where 2 plus passes, no till and strip till seem to be further behind in net returns. This can be explained if we look at the inverse relationship here of yields and total power costs associated with these tillage systems. As you see in the top row, that is yield per acre for these different tillage systems, we have highest yields for the higher tillage systems, 2 plus passes with the highest yield, 2 pass light and 2 pass moderate coming closely in second, and the lowest yielding tillage systems are no till, strip till, and 1 pass light. But that relationship is then somewhat inversed if we look at the total power costs of those systems. So then 2 plus passes of tillage has the highest total power cost, and no till has, as you might imagine, the lowest total power cost. So if you combine then the yield relationship and the power cost relationship, you see that those that brings us to those moderate tillage systems being the most profitable in terms of net return per acre. And you see this pattern similar in Illinois soybean fields, where again, those moderate tillage systems are the most profitable at or above $436 per acre in net return, with 2 plus passes, no till and strip till, again, quite a bit lower in terms of net returns. One other thing to consider is if we look at the top 25% financially profitable fields out of this data set, you see that the lower and moderate tillage systems are much more prevalent than the high tillage systems. So for example, on the left, if you look at the top 25% of financially performing cornfields, you find that 51% of that group is using 1 pass light tillage system, 30% two-pass light, 23% no-till, and you see that the two-pass medium and two plus pass groups are very few within that top 25% of fields with the highest net returns. And then if you look at soybeans, what's quite surprising is that 53% of that top 25% financially profitable fields are using no-till, with the second largest group being one pass light. So again, it's just to compare, if we look at across all of the data set from precision conservation management in Illinois, we find that those moderate tillage systems are the most profitable. But then if we look at the highest performers financially, those trends change a little bit, especially when you look at soybeans and you find that 53% of that group is using a no-till system.
Excuse me, Vincent, there's a couple questions in the chat that I think
Yeah,
would be helpful to address right in the middle
absolutely.
here. People want to know what light and medium tillage is. And then you can see Seth asks why the margin is so slim between the no-till and the two-pass system in terms of total power costs. I guess he expected a two-pass system to have much higher power costs, and instead it's only slightly higher. I don't know if you can speak to what's under the hood of those parts of the bar graph.
Yeah. Anna, would you you'd probably do a better job at explaining the definitions of those tillage intensities.
Well, I think it's probably, specific to this study. I would guess that they're looking at depth of tillage and whether it's more vertical versus more inversion based. So I'm guessing a moderate might be but it's totally guessed. I think we'd have to look up the actual study and see how they categorize things. I will say, Kurt, that it is a really difficult problem to try to classify different tillage systems, especially when you get into moderate or vertical tillage that encompasses a whole lot of space.
Yeah.
We will get the link to this though and send it to everybody so that you can see the categories. Yeah,
we will absolutely do that. But I think in general, that was a good description of the differences. And then the second question was about the power costs for no-till and two-pass light. Was that correct?
Yeah, they're only $38, $37 difference.
Yeah. I'm not, we'd have to ask the researchers on this one why that isn't that large. I mean, it's large enough, I would say, to make a significant difference. When you're considering that that's still 10% of the difference, or 10% of the net return on some of these fields. But at the same time, of course, there's other costs other than the power costs that are impacting the net return overall. But I mean, the difference between some of these power costs was enough to make the 2+ pass tillage system less profitable, even though it had the highest yield as a group.
Yeah, I guess I'm assuming that power cost includes, planting operations, harvesting operations, spraying operations.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of other operations that are in there, and the tillage operation is just part of it. So if you had just the tillage power cost, presumably the difference would be more striking.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. And then one other question I think is relevant right now is, it can be assumed these tillage intensity trends are representative of those participating in PCM, not the general population.
Yeah, I mean, I think PCM definitely is on the, how to describe it, they're on more profitable acres in general. They're on high productivity acres. At the same time, I think they are relatively representative of similar farms that aren't participating in PCM. So there is, of course, a slight skew there, but I think it's still relatively representative of the area.
Okay, I think you can go on then.
Okay. Thanks for the questions. And yeah, we can stop after each section and dive into some of the questions. So now if we turn over to talking about cover crops, we'll be using a different project and data from Minnesota. This data is actually not published yet. Will be published in 2 weeks. The project is a collaboration between EDF, my organization, the Center for Farm Financial Management at the University of Minnesota, the Farm Business Management Program out of Minnesota State, as well as a handful of other organizations. The project gathers in-depth cover crop financial data through the Minnesota Farm Business Management Program, which is a program that provides financial education, record keeping, and analysis support to producers in Minnesota. It's run through the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities program, where instructors from the Farm Business Management Program work directly with participating producers on the farm to gather in-depth enterprise and farm financial data that is then anonymized and submitted to the FinBin database, which is one of the largest publicly available financial databases in the country. We've worked specifically with these partners to integrate cover crop financial data gathering and analysis, which we will be doing from 2022 through 2024. So the data that I'll present here is from 2022, and that we'll be publishing, as I said, in a few weeks. So we were able to gather financial data on 3 different types of cover crops across about 83 farms, 121 fields. And as you can see here, this graph presents the average gross return for the cover crop enterprise specifically. So that can be both return on the crop itself, so using silage or the cover crop for forage. It can also include cost share revenue and other forms of incentive payments for growing cover crops. So it's combined in that gross return bar in black. And then it also presents in green the average total direct expense for that cover crop. So seed, application, termination, all of that. As you can see, there's quite a variability in the gross return and the direct expense of different cover crop types. As you might imagine, the rye silage bringing in a more significant gross return because of its purpose. But there's also a wide variety of direct expense. So of course, higher up there, $130 per acre for direct expenses for the rye silage group, all the way down to $53 per acre average for just a simple rye cover crop. As you'll see here in this graph, the only rye silage was the only one that essentially paid for itself. If you consider only the revenue and the expenses of the cover crop, not considering then its impact on the following commodity crop. But we'll dive into its impacts on the following crops in a few slides. If we break down those cover crop categories into and looking at a few of the expenses related to that cover crop, you'll see that there's quite a range in average costs of those expenses across the different types of cover crops. So on the low end, you have $16 per acre seed costs for the rye group, all the way up to $35 per acre seed costs for the cover crop forage group. Again, a significant difference also in fuel and oil costs, from $6 per acre for the cover crop mix group, all the way up to $19 per acre for the rye silage group. And then again, as we saw in the previous slide, the differences in total direct expenses is quite wide, between $43 per acre for the cover crop mix group and $95 per acre for the rye silage group. We're also, with this data, as I said, able to look at the the commodity crop enterprise with a cover crop planted before it, compared to other fields of the same commodity crop without a cover crop implemented before it, to compare across those enterprises how they performed financially. So as you'll see in these tables that I'll be presenting over the next 3 slides, we have a few different categories. So all the way on the left, you've got the corn enterprise on its own that was planted after a cover crop. So this is corn in southern Minnesota. So that would be the corn following the cover crop and all the costs and return associated with the corn enterprise on its own. The second column from the left is the direct expenses and revenue specific for the cover crop. The third column is those two combined. So if you consider the cover crop and then its following crop as one combined enterprise, that's the third column. The fourth column from the left is the cornfields grown by that cover crop group, but that did not include a cover crop. So some of these producers are growing cover crops on some of their fields, but not all. And that column provides a comparison to that same group, but the fields where they weren't growing a cover crop. And then the furthest column on the right is the average across all of southern Minnesota of fields, of cornfields without using a cover crop before it. As a synopsis of what we're finding in the 2022 data, the gross return between the fields using cover crops and the fields without cover crops across southern Minnesota is pretty similar. It's just 1% less for the cover crop group compared to the rest of their peers not using cover crops. The total expenses were lower for the cover crop group, even after including the costs for the cover crop itself. Overall, because of that slight difference in gross returns, the net return for the cover crop group was 2% lower than the fields without cover crops across southern Minnesota. If we turn then to soybean fields in southern Minnesota, we see quite a different picture. They're much less successful in 2022 than for corn. So the gross return was 11% lower for the group using cover crops as compared to the average across southern Minnesota. The total expenses were 12% higher after including the cover crop cost. And overall, the net return for the cover crop fields was about half of the net returns for the conventional fields not using cover crops. So not as successful in 2022 using cover crops before soybeans. Things look better when we look at cover crops before wheat. This is across the entire state of Minnesota. We weren't able to differentiate north and south because of the sample size. But the gross return was 14% higher for wheat fields after a cover crop compared to the wheat fields that weren't using cover crops. The total expenses were relatively similar, just 1% higher for the cover crop group. And then overall, the net return for fields using cover crops was 75% higher than wheat fields without cover crops. So overall, when we look across this, it's preliminary data just from 2022. We'll start to see some more trends as we gather data for across 3 years in the next 2 years. But this gives you an indication of the seed costs, the total direct expenses for the cover crops, and how it's impacting the following commodity crop. Any questions before I turn to nutrient management?
You had a couple specific questions about that. Going back up, was there anything for rental cost for cover crops?
Yes. So as you'll see in the full data tables or enterprise data tables that we'll be publishing in a few weeks, It's typical practice for to have that cost in the table as well. So you'll be able to see it. I don't have it in front of me, but we can share that once the data is published in a few weeks.
Okay. Why would fuel and oil be so different for each cover crop type?
I think because of the application or the seeding types that are being done by those groups.
The methods.
Yeah, the methods, and we weren't able, because we're doing this through a farm business management program where the focus is really on the financials and financial analysis. We're not able to ask some of those more management type questions like, how did you plant your cover crop? So, those are things that we can do as surveys to follow up, but we won't be able to gather the same in-depth information on questions like that. One of the drawbacks.
Yes. What does a cover crop before wheat look like?
Oof. Anyone else as an expert want to weigh in here?
I would say these are probably mostly on northern Minnesota acres. And I'm not sure what all that would be, because I would assume there'd be a full season crop beforehand and you wouldn't be able to get anything too diverse in there. So I'm really not sure. I would say that's less common than a cover crop after wheat in northern Minnesota. But they got a few people who are doing it. So I'm not sure.
We can follow up and ask some more questions from those producers.
Yeah. How many acres were included in the study? I don't know if we know that, but we certainly know producers.
Yes. Oh man, acres. I'd have to go look. There were so many numbers that I could pull from. I can get back to you on that.
I think the total number of producers, which isn't in every category, was like 170 or something like that this year.
This
Total
year,
number of fields.
So number of fields, I think, was 195 across 83 producers.
Yeah.
We have 121 producers participating in, or no, 131 producers participating in the program over the next 3 years. But some of them didn't plant a cover crop in 2022.
Which gets the next couple of comments, which are that they'd like to see more data for more years.
Great. That's our absolute goal.
Cover crop forages, what was used to calculate net return? Was this grazed or baled forage? Was the cost of not having to feed hay forage considered in this revenue? Probably, yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how to answer the first two, but the last would be a yes.
Yes. What was used to calculate net return? So the value of the forage,
yes,
but whether it was sold or fed would have been used to calculate net return.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. What metrics do you use to quantify the long-term savings or benefits of soil erosion control or soil health? Or was this analysis not done with this data set? I
don't think we can say that we had analyzed that well. I think over time, we hope to see those start to materialize in the enterprise budget. So erosion repair costs would go down. The soil health benefits in terms of being able to reduce input costs, more stable yields like that, you'd start being able to see that over time. But we're not able to specifically differentiate that because we're gathering enterprise level financial data across both the cover crop enterprise itself and the following commodity crop. But I will just add that we are tracking these fields over years through this data set. So the fields that were presented from 2022 will also be tracked in 23 and 24. And so across the rotation, we'll be tracking the financial performance of those fields with cover crops over time.
So it might end up under the hood in terms of fuel costs if you're talking about erosion repair or other expenses in the whole farm budget. And the FinBin data set is really comprehensive in terms of getting at all those elements of the farm budget.
Yes.
Okay. I think you can move on.
Okay. How much time do I have left, Anna?
Ideally about 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll be quick on nutrient management. So for nutrient management, I'm going to go back to the data set from Illinois with precision conservation management. Again, they're gathering the input and field passes, combining that with average cost to evaluate the costs associated with different practices. So if we look here first at different fertilizer application methods, you see a yield difference across if producers are applying greater than 40% in the fall versus mostly pre-plant, mostly side dress, 50-50 split and three-way split, highest yield with three-way split, lowest yield kind of in those mostly pre-plant and 50-50. Then when you look at the total direct costs, however, the three-way split is significantly higher than some of those other groups, with mostly pre-plant having the lowest total direct costs. Then when you look at land return overall, so net return on those acres, the most profitable seem to be mostly pre-plant application and mostly side dress, with the lowest performers being the other three around, between $352 of net return per acre to $356 of net return per acre. And then if we look at rates, you wouldn't be surprised to find that the University of Illinois' maximum return to nitrogen score is where the fields are most profitable, between 151 pounds per acre and 175 pounds per acre. So, with real on-farm data, you are finding that those rates are the most profitable. And as you start straying further away, applying above that recommended rate, the net return per acre starts going down pretty significantly. Greater than 225 pounds per acre, you're down to $358 of net return per acre, as compared to that $379 if you're following the recommended rate from the University of Illinois. So I'll just quickly recap from what I presented today. Farmers have economic questions about these practices, and really ensuring that we gather more of this data, distill it, and have it in a presentable way to producers is really critical. Another critical piece is always consider the financial impacts of conservation holistically. Don't look only at yields, present the impacts on revenue, the added costs that we know that some of these practices involve, but also some of the cost savings that we're seeing as we gather more data, and then the overall net return. Be sure to present this as a complete story and not narrow in on just the additional cost aspect or just the yield impact aspect of using in-field conservation practices. Just quickly to recap some of this from the data that we have now in the region from some of these larger data sets, which I think are, can be trusted a little bit more than small case studies. We're finding that, reduced tillage is more profitable than greater intensity and number of passes of tillage. However, no-till is less profitable on average than other forms of reduced tillage. But again, as I presented earlier, some of the most profitable fields, especially for soybeans, are using no-till. So there's more to be unpacked there. For cover crops, in most cases, they're not independently profitable on their own without considering their impacts on the following crop. Except when you use it as silage, then it has its own return and can pay for itself. But as we saw from the 2022 data in Minnesota, commodity crops can still be profitable when using cover crops. And as we gather more data, we'll have a better sense of how much more or how much less profitable than their comparable fields that aren't using cover crops. And then lastly, just remember, incentive payments are really critical to reducing the costs of doing cover crops. And really ensuring that producers know about those opportunities and are using those opportunities is critical to making cover crops the most cost-effective as possible. Lastly, as we just presented, pre-plant and side dress nitrogen application are more profitable than more fall application, and the university recommended rates are more profitable than over applying nitrogen. Thanks for allowing me to present this to you all. Feel free to contact me if you have any more questions. I'll be excited to share some of that cover crop data that we'll be publishing in a few weeks. If you want to scan this QR code, this brings you to our EDF Ag Finance resource hub, where we have all sorts of reports and blogs about this topic, the financial impacts of conservation, but also ways in which agricultural lending institutions and other stakeholders can help develop financial products and financial incentives to help producers profitably adopt conservation practices.
Thank you, Vincent. I think it's worth addressing a couple of questions in the chat. Maybe you could stop sharing your screen and let Serge get situated. One is about farmer time. How much are farmers paying themselves, or is farmer time included in these cost analyses?
Yes, the farmers' costs are evaluated in these analyses. In the presentation, I try to not put too many numbers here, but when we publish the final data, you'll see, we've got direct costs, but then we also have, time and indirect costs included in those tables as well.
Okay. And then, since the precision ag systems are more likely to be used by large farmers, how do you think the Illinois data relates to people farming 200 to 300 acres without precision ag tools?
Yeah, I don't think that the findings are necessarily different. We're just able to gather more data from those systems. But I think, as other studies have shown, those MRTN rates of fertilizer application are just more profitable than over applying. If you look at 1 year on its own, and in this case, if you look across 5 years. And so I don't know if necessarily the results would be any different for smaller acres. Of course, the upfront costs relative to the balance sheet of a farm for buying a new piece of equipment is more significant. But I think in terms of the trends that we're seeing across the data, both for nutrient management, but then also for cover crops and tillage, I think you would see similar outcomes.
Okay. There is probably more to be teased apart there. In the FinBin database, I know you can split by farm size.
Yes.
So that's something that you can play around with, and we'll get the FinBin link into the chat too.
Yep.
Go ahead and share your screen, Serge, and we will get you going as we can. That looks right to me. Can you just briefly introduce yourself as you get going? Thank you, Vincent, and thanks everybody for sticking with us.
You betcha. Yes, so thank you, Anna. My name is Serge Koenig. I work for Sauk County Conservation Department, and I've been doing this conservation work. I'm a conservation technician, and I've been a technician all my career. And it's been 28 plus years at this point doing the same thing, and it never gets old. And I still enjoy it, and I look forward to coming to work. So I probably switched over to looking at the grazing piece more so recently, probably the last 6 or 7 years, and shifting away from the corn and beans quite as much. So this is a bit of a different presentation than what you all just experienced. And I tend to come at the human aspect of it just a little more, but the finances is definitely what's made the difference for me and in our county. So I'd say for the first 20 years or so of my career, really didn't hammer on the finances much. I didn't go to school for that. I went to school for watershed and soils and natural resource protection. And so the finances were something that I was scared of, I'll be honest. And I think that's true for a lot of us technicians in the conservation field. This is not something we're comfortable talking about. And so we get scared about it. And yet we can't get scared about it, because this is how things really move. Because I'll just tell you my story. Literally, we were installing conservation practices, barnyards, grass waterways, things like that. And those are fine, but those weren't really getting at, we have this, if we're looking at the backpack analogy, I think all those things were like taking pebbles out of our backpack, but like changing the actual landscape and what it looks like by like addressing huge fields. That's taken out the bigger rocks out of the backpack. And so I switched over to like taking out the big rocks the last 7-8 years of my career or so. And that happened through using finances and economics to get there. And so I think we averaged, like some of you have heard this story before, we average 0 to 10 acres a year in rotational grazing conversions in our own county. And as soon as I had Paul Dittman, which all of you probably experienced yesterday, his presentation, I had him sit down with me and another coworker, and we just hammered out, like, learn to understand what farm finance looks like and how important it is. And after a few months of just practicing and diving into it and just committing to it, we literally, that very first year, we went from 5 acres to 600 acres. And that's when my eyes were open, like, okay, this is the way to go. And I think the following year we put in 1,080 acres. And then the next year we had another 600 or 700 acres. We've been averaging probably between 400 and 800 acres a year converted over to grazing. And it's mostly the farm finances and digging through the numbers is what's really made a difference. And that's all good too. And really it makes sense if you think about it. Like, just look at your own lives. When you make decisions, which job you're going to take, you're looking at the finances. What am I going to get paid? Yes, this is satisfying work, but if it's paying $5 an hour, I'm not doing it, right? And so why do we expect farmers to be different than that? We do it all the time. Should I buy this car? Should I not? Well, let me look at the finances. Can we afford those payments? No. Should we buy this house? Which vacation should we go on? Should it be a camping vacation for all the various reasons? Well, can we take a hotel stay? I don't know. Let's look at the finances. It's the same thing for farmers. And I think once I realized that, that changed my approach to the whole thing. And I just had to get out of my own comfort zone. And yes, I know this is not our training, but I don't need to be a farm finance expert. There are people like Paul and Vincent that are there for those kinds of things. Just need to be able to run enterprise budgets and talk about numbers. That's about where most farmers are anyway. And I think the experience that I've had is, like, I'm finding that a lot of our producers aren't really running the numbers as intently as they should. And as a result, it's not leading to some positive results. When the market's really good, well, everybody's making money and you can kind of be a little sloppier. But when things get a little bit constrained and the prices go down and the prices for fertilizer goes up, running those numbers really make a difference. And so I found that it's been a game changer. And so this is, I would say, take this seriously if you're serious about being effective at your jobs and being effective at moving people in a direction towards conservation. You really have to run the numbers and just get out of the comfort zone, and you can learn it. If I can learn it, I know you can learn it. And this isn't my training by any means. So that's only one aspect of it. The other aspect is being able to work with people, right? So all the numbers and everything that we're seeing in front of us, and it's profitable, it's not profitable. Sometimes it doesn't matter what the numbers say. Some people just have it in their minds that this is the way I'm going to do something. And there's nothing you can do to change that. And it's a pride thing, obviously, and it's a distrust thing, obviously, too. And so it's learning to work with people and working with farmers to move the needle. And how do we do that? Well, I've always wondered. So presentation goals, farmer human, building nature, building trust, I should say. And then we'll dive into the business side of farming and working with lenders and landlords. So I'm going to take the first two things on that list, and then Sarah will take over from there. So I like this one in that so many things boil down to these very simple things, and it's human nature stuff, and it's human psychology stuff. And it's the whole idea of like, hey, I'm pretty important. Make me feel that way. It is one of the deepest principles in human nature. Most of us crave to be appreciated in some way or another. And so when you can learn to appreciate and help the landowner feel important, or the person you're working with, it could be your partner, like you do your best to make them feel important and cared for. Then I think you'll be amazed at how far you can go with that. There's something about us that crave to be appreciated and to made feel important. And so what have I learned over the years of 28 years of doing this? It's like, I think being a student of the farm is kind of a big deal. So the whole listening thing, I think we hear that a lot in a lot of presentations. Make sure you're a good listener. Well, what does that mean? How do you execute that? Well, most of us people like to talk about ourselves. That's pretty normal. And you can try to refute that all you want, but that's generally how we all operate. And it's hard to admit that because it sounds really bad. When I say that, it sounds bad. And I cringe when I say that because I'm talking about myself too. Then it's all of us. We all like to talk about ourselves. And so farmers are no different, just another human. And so like, if you're asking questions, open-ended type questions, and you're really inquisitive and you're listening as they answer those questions. So when I say open-ended questions, it's like, it sure is warm today, isn't it? Yep. That's not an open-ended question. It's more like, how did you come to this farm? What was the story behind this? And off they go. And then you're listening as they're telling you, as they're answering your question, open-ended question, you're listening for clues. Like, so what's the next thing I could ask based on what I just heard? So like you are listening. And so then ask another open-ended question. And pretty soon they're doing most of the talking. And that's perfect. Because remember, humans like to talk about themselves. So like, let them talk about their farms. And so what you're doing is you're making connections. And that's the way our brains are wired. We need to connect with one another. And that's how we stay in towns and families. We're not tigers that live alone for 90% of our lives. We stay together and as a unit. And that's evolution happening right there. We've evolved to connect to one another so that we can defend ourselves from saber-toothed tigers or nature's fury or whatever it is. So these are inherent in all of us. And we can try to say that, I can fend for myself and I can look out for myself and I'm a rugged individual. You're not. None of us are. Eventually, somewhere along the line, we need one another, and most of us need each other almost all the time. And so what you're doing when you ask these questions and you're listening is you're forming that bond that is inherent in all of us. And so once that bond is there, you start to form an understanding, first of all, of who that person is, and they understand you. What you're doing is you're building that trust. And pretty soon when you suggest things, they're more open to like hearing you. And then you bring in the numbers, right? Like Vincent just showed us, or I'll share with them some enterprise budgets. And now the mind is more open. You might still get the middle finger, but that's just, like I always figure, like if I can get 3 out of 10 producers interested in moving in a direction, that's success. So the other 7 are saying, screw you, I'm not interested, and I'm not going that direction. But so like, please approach it that way, because you're just not going to get everybody, no matter what you do. They're not necessarily going to be open to the numbers and open to the message of conservation and moving the conversation that way. So, and as long as you know that up front and you come at it with an open mind and open eyes, I think you're going to be better psychologically.
Chris, Brendan, you need to eat lunch too.
We're eating lunch. So building a relationship could just take time, and it can take years. And the big thing is just to be patient with it and persist, but you can't overdo it. And it's tough, sometimes, like if the answer is no the first time and you follow and you just give up, sometimes that's not the best way to go. I find that you can kind of stay with it, but without being a pestilent, a pest. And so sometimes it's once a year, once every few months, I happen to be driving by, stop in, we have a conversation, could be just talking about their kids, about their farm, the state of farming, whatever it is. But like, you're just building a trust is what we're doing. So I try to really pay attention to like upcoming events. Sometimes they're buying new equipment. Sometimes a kid's getting married. I make a note in my calendar actually, and then just reach out to them and like, hey, how's it going? How did that go? How was your vacation? How did that go? And the old saying, right? What nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. And that is so true. And so like, when you're doing these things, it shows you actually do care, and you can't fake it. You have to mean it, because you know how we are. Our radar picks that up. Like, okay, you're being phony here. Like, and if you don't mean it, then maybe don't do that. You have to mean it, and you have to like, and that's, you're showing them, you're taking time out of your own personal day. Sometimes it's at nights that I remember to do it, and I'll send the text. You're taking time out of your own busy schedule to reach out to them, and those little things is what builds trust, so that they can be more open to seeing the numbers with you and going through the enterprise budget. And so some of us in the conservation field and in government, we just have a lot of programs, whether it's EQIP or NRCS or LCD or LRE, or there's so many acronyms. It's like going to the doctor and they're speaking Greek and you don't understand it, and you basically shut it out. It's just noise, right? Same thing with our producers. We just want to try to keep it simple. And so for me, a lot of times I'll say, well, instead of EQIP or an NRCS, I just say, well, there's a federal pool of money, there's a state pool of money, and there's a county pool of money, and which one we dive into depends on whatever. But like, I just kind of try to keep it simple like that, and you can keep them engaged. Everybody's different, and all these communication styles are so different. And so like, that's why I would say that, so like, being at decent at finances really matters. But then being a psychologist really matters, too. Because I think that's what I see in the science field and even in the conservation field is we're good at those things, but we're not good at the people stuff. And so none of it matters until you figure out the people stuff. once you kind of figure that out, then it's probably important to figure out some basic budgeting, financing stuff. You don't need to be an expert, like I said, but just you got to know the basics. And I think that's where you start to make a difference and be effective at your job. It's okay to not know everything because it's not possible. Don't come across as some expert that knows everything. I oftentimes say, I don't know, but I'll get back to you. And don't wait too long to do that, because it'll look like, oh, he's just another talker. He talks a big game, but he really doesn't follow up. So there's the human aspect again. I think I've learned just through different practices and just through the years of coming across different farmers to kind of stay calm, regardless of the situation. I'll just give you an example. So that's probably 2 years on the job already at this point. And I called a producer, a local dairy farmer, said, say, can I come out to your place? I get a watershed project here and we have some funds we can put towards things like barnyards. And that was the big thing back in the day. And so, yeah, so I got his wife was on the phone and she said, yep, come on out. I said, how about after chores? Yep, sounds good. So about 10 o'clock, I show up and I'm putting on my rubber boots because we're about to walk through the lots. And no one's there yet, but it's just a couple minutes later, a tractor kind of comes towards my truck pretty aggressively, it looks like. And the landowner jumps off the tractor, and it's like every other swear word in the vocabulary. What are you doing on my property? Just fill in the blank yourself. And I thought, what? I spoke to your wife and she says to come on out today. She goes, well, I don't bleep and care. You didn't bleep and talk to me. I thought, well, of course, my temptation there is to say, well, I'm sorry that you and your wife don't communicate. But of course, that was going to exacerbate the problem. So at that point, like, okay. And then off he went off again. And then I just kind of stood there calmly looking at him. And then I think he caught himself. It's like, God, I just made a fool of myself. And this guy didn't just run off like I wanted him to run off, but he didn't. He just kind of stood there and calmly let me make a fool of myself. And so literally, I don't know what it was, but then he just slowly switched over and said, so why are you here? And then I rephrased why I was here. And then off we went. And by the time I left, within an hour or so, he signed up to put in 2 or 3 different conservation practices. And had I just left right away, that would have never happened. And so that's part of it, is like, you're approaching people, you don't know what chapter of that book you just opened up. Maybe 2 of his animals died. Maybe milk prices went down. Maybe he's having issues with his wife or her husband. You just don't know. Maybe a kid, they're having issues with the kid, or he's got his own psychological issues that he's dealing with, or just farm stress. And you stepped right in the middle of that. And so you got to know that going in, that this might happen. Obviously, if it's unsafe, you need to get out. I get that. But lots of times it's really not. It's just, if you just wait, it kind of dissipates. And then all of a sudden it's like, so, and I find that also rephrasing their frustration. So what I got from that was that, did something happen, or you just rephrasing what he just said. So he knows you're listening at that point, or she knows you're listening, and then off you go. So I'm finding those little things. I mean, they're not big things, and you don't learn these things when you go to school for conservation or when you go to school for farm finance. These are not things you learn, but yet it's awfully critical, because you got to get in the door. That's how I always feel like, just let me in the door. Give me 10 minutes, and then we can just calm down and we can talk, and start building some trust and connections and build a relationship. And maybe we have a chance to move towards more conservation practices. And so what is this? Is it art? Is it science? It's actually both. There's no real prescription. There are some basic principles. Make connection first. Don't talk business as much as you can. Make connection. I'm looking for clues all the time. As soon as I drive up the farm, I'm looking around for clues, like what can I start a conversation with? What can I ask an open-ended question with? Maybe have some open-ended questions already in mind when you show up at the farm so that you can immediately start to make connections. And once we get there, and then we start talking business, and you're always listening and asking questions and letting them do as much talking as you can. Some people, it's hard to do that, and then I have to step in and do it in the best way I can. And then sometimes you have to leave. That's all there is to it. There's nothing you can do. And I've learned what kind of producers that, yeah, you can kind of read it right away. Like, okay, this isn't probably going to go anywhere. And then you just leave, I guess, or you give it your best. And so it is both for sure. So I used to think, so I coach basketball and soccer, my boys, and basketball and soccer I've been coaching basketball for 26 years or so, and my boys' soccer and basketball teams for the last 13 years. So like 10 months out of the year, I was coaching, much to the chagrin of my wife. And anyhow, I guess I always thought this whole idea of myelination. So, maybe a lot of you probably know this already, but for those that may not be familiar, when we do something, our neurons, the synapses between them, there's a fatty substance, it's called myelin, that forms around the communication between the different neurons. And so that myelin wraps around itself like an ace bandage. And every time you do it, it wraps another. I'm oversimplifying, but that's the concept. It keeps wrapping myelin around those communication centers. And so that, like, when you want to walk, remember when you first learned to walk, you had to stand up. And that took a while. You watch your kids do it. It took a while just to stand up. And pretty soon, it's not muscle memory. The memory is actually up here. It's the synapses that control the muscles from the brain. And so you do that enough times, and pretty soon you don't have to think about standing up. And then you take the first step and myelination occurs, and you take a second step, and pretty soon you can walk and not think about it because the myelin is so thick around that neural pathway. Well, so then that's why, like, when I would try to correct, like, say, somebody's shooting form in basketball, like, it was so hard to change it because that myelination was so strong because they have done it this way for so long that we were trying to form a new neural pathway in the brain to learn to shoot a basketball. Well, I guess I never realized until just recently that happens in the way we think too. So you and I were all the same that way. Like, you can look at an event and it'll conjure up certain feelings in your mind. And you might even have sweaty palms and your heart might race a little bit. Someone else can look at the same thing and that's not their reaction. And so that's when you know that, like, oh, my neurons are firing a certain way based on not something physical, but something mental and the way I think about something. And so like, think about that then when it comes to getting people to think differently about planting corn or converting to grazing or putting in a conservation practice or whatever it is. I mean, everything is controlled this way, believe it or not. And so then when I show up, just to give my example, like, hey, would you consider doing rotational grazing? Instead of growing corn and beans, which we're not really eating that anyway, mostly, we might be drinking it in the form of high fructose corn syrup, maybe think about growing animals and putting the land into permanent vegetation, a little less stress. And then you get the pushback. Well, it's hardwired. I mean, and so when we do this kind of work, it's hard. It's really, really an uphill climb. And so knowing that that's the deal, hopefully it gives you some patience too, because like you don't like the change. Trust me, you don't like the change. And so you want farmers to change and change the way they approach things? I don't think so. I mean, so you just got to know that going in, that this myelination thing is real and it happens to all of us. And so like, that's why it's hard to get producers sometimes to change their mind about something. It's because this is so hardwired into their brains, just like it is for all of us when it comes to doing different things. So this is one way that I think once you build the trust and you start looking at finances and like, okay, financially it makes sense. I heard it from someone I trust. Okay, we're someone I have a relationship with. Okay, so then I generally just dive into like, okay, so why are you doing all this? I mean, what is the purpose? What's the why behind you farming or farming the way that you do? Do you feel like you got trapped into it? Do you feel like there's a debt load and you have to, I mean, do you still love this thing called farming? Or are you doing it because, well, this is just what I do? And so I think as a professional though, I kind of went through the process probably a good 15 to 20 years ago, like why I was doing what I was doing, because it seemed like I felt like at times I was just hitting my head against the wall, like, wow, we're just not making any progress here at all. And so that made it difficult to kind of proceed. And so anyway, figuring out what your why is kind of important, why you're doing the kind of work you're doing. And then once you get feeling kind of comfortable with that answer, then I think it's kind of important to kind of work that into your conversations with producers so that they're convicted in what they're doing and know why they're doing it. And they're going to likely stick with it more. So I got to keep going here. So then once you figure out their why, adjust your communication then to address that why. Well, you said you wanted to do it because of this. Well, here's how that ties in. So you try to tie it all together. And the goal is that when you're all done, it's like you've got to the heart and you got to the mind and you got through the numbers, they're in. And hard times, whatever, they're like, say for grazing, like, yep, they are so convicted in here and up here that Mother Nature can throw haymakers their way and you can adjust and they stick with it. And so that's why I think that's part of the whole package. And that human part is the part that we drop the ball on too many times. And so I think it's time for me to move on. Sarah, are you on board? Can you stop sharing my screen?
I am here. If you wouldn't mind, Serge, I'm just going to have you flip the slides because I only have like 3 or 4. And we learned on Tuesday, I'm not very good at getting this share screen up anymore. I'm not as good as Zoom as I once was. So,
okay, sure.
So basically, first of all, Serge, that was amazing. I really I'm sitting here and I'm just nodding like, yes, this is exactly what, as a lender that, the things we would like to see and everything. So well done, Serge, and Vincent too. I had like a list of questions and I was going to email them later, but you guys asked a lot of them, which is amazing. So when you're talking to a farmer, and I'm saying this as a farmer myself, you need to keep in mind, like he was said, you need to talk their language a little bit, and you need to, what's going to be of interest to them, right? It takes money to make money, and even nonprofit farms need capital to stay in business, right? Farmers have lenders, vendors, landlords, and others they need to repay or need to put a crop in the ground. Serge, can you go to the next slide, please? I think it's the one after that. Yeah, that's one. Okay, so Paul went over a little bit about this early on Tuesday. I just kind of want to reiterate. When farmers look for lenders, and especially if they're going to do something unique like organics or some conservation practices, finding a lender they can trust is a big deal. Someone that will partner with them and their conservation objectives, that realize what they want to do and will set them up with success. A lender that communicates well with them. If they're not doing very well or something's not cash flowing, and all of a sudden they get a call one day saying you need to pay everything today or you're past due on this, it's not a good relationship, right? As a lender, I need farmers to talk to me, and they also need me to talk with them. Knowledge is a thing. Paul mentioned that not every ag lender will know some of these things like equip and CRP and the details, but you need to find a lender that understands your business and is willing to go out there and learn for you. So I had a guy that wanted to plant chestnut trees, and all of a sudden I'm on Google reading all I can about chestnut trees. Dedication. This one's kind of a big one when it comes to conservation, because the changes that these farmers are implementing are not going to show results overnight, right? It may not even be a year. It might be over 2 years. You need someone who's going to be like, okay, over time, this is going to get better. We're going to be patient with this. You need someone that's going to be dedicated to that farmer and is willing to kind of be like, all right, we have tighter cash margins. Let's plan around it. Or maybe even they say, let's push this loan payment back a few months and see what happens once this, grain comes in or something. So next slide, please, Serge. Okay, so this is from one of our books that we have published, which are free, by the way. If you'd like our books, they're primarily not written by us. They're written by people in the industry, and they're free, and I'll send them you for free. You just have to email me and I'll send them. This is what farmers have to take into their lenders. And the reason I put this in here is because, like Serge said, like knowing the financials and what they have to deal with is going to help you speak their language a little better. So understanding at the end of the day, that farmer might be sitting there talking with you, and they're in the back of their mind, they're thinking, what my lender is going to think about this. This is what we ask for from them. We ask for their financial statements, income tax returns. So it does matter to us what it looks like on the Schedule F. Ideally, they have an accrual income statement, but next slide, if you would. Serge, can you go to the next slide? There we go. This is where you guys can kind of come in. If I have a farmer who's doing something unique and you're working with them and it's like a conservation practice or something, I'm probably going to give you a call to kind of get details, not because I'm, trying to micromanage. I just want to understand what they're doing better. And if you have something in writing already about like, this is what they're doing, and they're able to put your name and number down, and you all of a sudden become a resource for not only that farmer, but for their ag lender, that's a really good thing. We need to understand what they're doing with their acres so that we can better plan for them. Next slide, please, Serge. Inputs is another thing. So I really appreciated, I think it was Vincent that had this slide that showed like the cost savings on this. That's one thing, even on our own farm, we talk about. It's like, well, these cover crops are going to cost us money to put in and everything, but how much are we going to save over time on like fertilizer if we don't need to put on commercial fertilizer, right? So if you can help them with their numbers, and it may not be that it's cheaper to put in like cover crops or to do conservation, but it may have, it may save them in the long run, right? Short term, it might be more expensive. Long term, though, it might be better for the soil, help them increase their yields, thereby increasing their income, right? And if you want to talk farmers' language, I can't remember if it was Vincent or Serge, someone said that farmers do not look at the dollars and cents. Absolutely true. I mean, that's a lot of my day is looking at things that they don't look at on a regular basis, right? If you can talk their language and then put it in the dollars and cents for them, they're going to love it. If you really want to get to the heart of a farmer, you talk about the yield. Anything that's talked about at the coffee shop, or the first thing they talk about with me, is not what their net profit was, it's what their yield was. That is really speaks to farmers' language. So if you can say, if you do this practice, it's going to, studies have shown it increases your yield by this much over this amount of time. That's speaking farmers' language. Every now and then you're going to get that farmer that's going to be like, well, this is, going to make me this much money, and they're going to know that. But I would say that's not all of them, but I guarantee you all of us as farmers If you talk to us about yield, all of our ears will open right away. So, yeah, so that's some of the helpful reference materials that you could possibly help provide them to give to their lenders, right? Serge, if you go to the next slide, please. Next one, please. Okay, so farmers need to know their numbers. They need to be able to clearly and realistically explain their goals and their timeline for achieving them. Knowing their numbers, like I just said and Serge said, is very hard, right? That's where I kind of come in, is understanding what they're doing and helping them put those numbers together. Their goals are another big thing. That is something you might want to ask them, and that might be something that you can connect them with, is understanding what their goals are for their farm, right? If they know that you are thinking about their interests overall, that's a big deal. That's something I have a lot of my customers do, is do short-term, midterm, and long-term goals. If you're doing conservation practices, I would literally want to sit down with a conservation person or my soil and water person who I know very well. And I would sit down and say, Becky, explain to me what are realistic goals for this, you know, and how long it's going to take me. Okay. Risk management is a must. So like I said here, a lot of agriculture is unpredictable. You need to be prepared to show lenders and your landlords that they are that you are prepared for the good and the bad. So that means if you can get crop insurance, get it, farm blanket insurance, diversified farm operations. So like in my area, there's a lot of just corn and soybean farmers. Add livestock, maybe add something else into the rotation, alfalfa, something, wheat. Or if you have off-farm income, if you're just doing corn and soybeans in my area, if you have an off-farm income, I know you have somewhat of a diversified operation because you have a supplemental income somewhere. Can you go to the next slide, please, Serge? Okay, so final thoughts with this. As a lender, and you're going to meet with this with just about every lender, and some of them are going to be more focused on this than others. They're going to be focused on how will the farmer's debt be repaid. Ideally, they will be, you know, it's not black and white every time, and ideally they realize that, but how will the farmer's debt be repaid is a principal question we get from our loan committees and our policy books and our auditors and the examiners. The landlords will want to ensure they receive their lease and rent payments. So if they are looking for a new landlord and they want to do conservation, they need to show the landlord how they're going to get paid. They're going to get paid, right? Increasing expenses or decreasing income either needs to be offset by decreasing expenses or increasing income. So farmers need to be prepared to make adjustments as needed. We say that all the time. You have to be flexible, be prepared to make adjustments. If something didn't work, try something else. So with conservation practices, if something didn't work, be ready to move on to something else. And farmers need to have a risk management plan in place for unforeseeable issues. We like to call it the go to heck plan. If everything goes wrong in a year, do you have a safety net? What is your plan for that? One more slide, if you would, Serge, please. And I'm going to hand this back to Serge because he has some really good recommendations here for you. Thank you, Serge. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah. So I think, Ann, do we have what, 1 minute to go?
We're supposed to wrap up at 11:30, but we were a little late last time, and I think we might as well just plan to be a little late this time. We'll certainly put the link to all these budgets in the chat for people to pull out and send it to them.
Okay. So yeah, so I started diving into some of the tools that I wanted to share with you folks today. And here was one, there was a link, I know, to the Minnesota. Yep, there it is right there. I found this was probably one of the first ones that I learned to dig into, and it was done by UW Extension here. And it's just the corn budget, you know, just plain and simple.
Serge, I'm sorry, we're not seeing the budget. We're still seeing the screen with the PowerPoint.
Okay.
So I think you need to have it in the same window as a tab on the same window.
Okay.
I see the budgeting tools Google Sheet, if that's helpful.
Oh, okay. Here we go. I think I got it here. How does that look?
Very nice. Thank you.
Okay, there it is. Okay. So this was the first one that I probably really dove into. And yes, it seems awfully intimidating, but again, you have to be able to talk the language if you want people to take you seriously and you want to like move the conversation along. And so it's pretty simple. What are you expecting for yields? So you have to be kind of a student of all of this. And it depends on the area that you're in. I mean, maybe it's not a very big corn and beans area, and maybe it is. Maybe it's more of a livestock area. So then there are different enterprise budgets for that. I'm just going to go through this one real quick. And it's really, how much are you expecting? I think today I looked it up. It was like $5.49 or $5.50 per bushel for corn. So learning what a bushel is, and what typical yields are in your area, that helps. And I find that I think the best way to do it, first of all, familiarize yourself a little bit with it, but then find a producer that you have a really good relationship with, who is just nice, I would say, and is willing and patient to walk you through it, because they become the teacher, and that's kind of cool for a lot of folks to be able to teach others. And so what do you put on? Do you put on liquid fertilizer? Do you put on dry fertilizer? Okay, what about nitrogen fertilizer? Is it urea? Is it anhydrous? What rates do you put in? How about phosphorus and potassium? You put in a manure pass. And how about, do you custom hire this out? And then liming, corn seeds, seeds, this is the amount of seeds per acre that you're putting in. And then do you put in an herbicide application? And there are different tabs towards the bottom that will help figure out what those different costs are. So over here, it's got the different costs for the different things, urea. It's all kind of plugged in here, and they pre-plug this in for us here at UW Extension. And so I just grab their numbers. But if the landowner has a different set of numbers, then you use that. And what I love about it is that it's theirs. It's very specific to them and exactly what they're doing. And what it does towards the very end, it factors all of this in, and at the very end, it kind of gives out this number, cost per bushel. That's the break even. And then kind of what the net return is per acre. In this situation, it was like $93 an acre was the net return. But it all depends on all the different things that you're putting in there. And I know it's intimidating. This is what I thought, no way. I'm not touching this. There's no way, but I had to. You just kind of have to. It's almost like a teacher, saying, I love teaching, but I just hate kids, and so this is just what you have to do. And if you don't like doing this, then it might be a time to change jobs. You have to learn to like it, and you have to learn to just at least tolerate it, because this is not what we went to school for. But to be effective at the job, we kind of have to dig into these numbers. The other thing, so that's one of them. There is, can you see this, Anna?
They'll just see in the spreadsheet.
The same spreadsheet as before?
Yep.
Okay, where do I do this again? I think the concept is the same. There's so many spreadsheets out there, and there's plenty of just enterprise budget spreadsheets that get familiar with your area and what the predominant uses are and what the predominant land uses are, and find some of those enterprise budget spreadsheets. That's what I did. And I found that it was really helpful in moving things along towards more conservation practices installed on the landscape. And it was just much more effective than just trying to sell a practice like, yep, you should do this because it's good for the environment. Oh, okay. How does that make my loan payments? And I was usually, I don't know, but it sure is good for the environment. See how you just don't move things along that way. It's got to make sense numbers wise, and you got to do it in a humanly conscious way, using a lot of psychology at the same time. And so these are kind of the things that I think I've just picked up over the last 28 years of doing this work. I think I'm good.
Okay. Thanks for showing us that, Serge. And I like the idea of working with a farmer who you think we'll be open with you to try to get accustomed to some of the numbers in there. Hopefully people have some contacts that they're able to do that with.
Yeah, you got to
Um,
practice. You have to practice first.
Yeah.
And it just takes a while to practice over and over, and then give yourself scenarios and talk to another farmer and then talk to another one that you trust. And then eventually you kind of feel more comfortable and confident.
Yes. Jenny just put a link to an evaluation in the chat. Please go ahead and open that if you're able to, and let us know how we're doing. As we said, this is the first time we've piloted this training. I think it's a really important topic, and I think we've had great presenters, but we'd love to hear your feedback on how we can make it better next time we try to explain finances to those of us who, like Serge said, didn't go to school for this stuff. We'll also send it in a follow-up email. Thank you again to our presenters today, Sarah and Serge and Vincent. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate everybody's time in joining us.
Thank you, Sarah.